The only bad decision that the New Orleans Saints made on Sunday was not starting Spencer Rattler. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst with WWL TV. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're taking a look at the New Orleans Saints 1-point loss to the Washington Commanders that almost feels as good as a win. The decision to go for two at the end was risky, but it was the right choice. Why the New Orleans Saints have not given up on Jake Haener after a really rough first half, but why they might have learned a lot more about Spencer Rattler than they intended to in this week's game. We got all that coming up for you today. Whether you're catching us live, catching us later, catching us for your first time or your next time, we appreciate you very much for making us your first listen and for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by friends over at FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get started with $150 in bonus bets by simply winning your first $5 bet. Just head over to FanDuel.com today to get started. The New Orleans Saints' only bad decision in this game, in my opinion, in my humble opinion, is not starting Spencer Rattler. The New Orleans Saints made the decision to go with Jake Haener in this game. Jake Haener struggled big time in the first half. He was under a lot of pressure, didn't have a lot of things to help him out. The big plays that he did make got called back for penalties, all these other things. But it was a tough, big-time struggle for Jake Haener, and it led to the New Orleans Saints and head coach Darren Rizzi making what was a, let's call it what it is, risky decision, benching second-year quarterback Jake Haener in his first career start to turn to rookie quarterback Spencer Rattler, who got 3 starts earlier this season and did not come up with a win during that time, but it turned in immediate success for the New Orleans Saints. And I think the New Orleans Saints might have learned more about Spencer Rattler in this game than they learned about Jake Haener, whether you're talking positive or negative, and I think that works out well for the New Orleans Saints. Spencer Rattler, he's got a little something. He's got a little something, and I think you saw that in this game. Look, this game right now is going to be a game that's going to go down in the win column, loss column as a loss. 3 years from now, we won't be talking about this game as the game that Spencer Rattler arrived. We won't be talking about this as the game that Jake Haener failed. It won't be that conversation. By the way, I don't think Jake Haener failed. But I'm just saying this isn't how we're going to talk about this game down the road. What we will be talking about when it comes to this game instead is the fact that they lost it, right? That's all that's going to be remembered from this one later on. But for right now, in the short term, this gives the New Orleans Saints a really, really good opportunity to understand exactly what they have when it comes to young quarterbacks on their roster. And they should feel really good about Spencer Rattler right now. Let me give you a couple of facts, all right? Just facts here. Jake Haener completed 4 passes in the first half. He was under pressure a ton, threw an interception, was sacked 3 times. So combined sacks and interceptions equaled the amount of completed passes that he had. But once the Saints turned to to Spencer Rattler in the second half, Spencer Rattler led 4 straight scoring drives. That was big for the New Orleans Saints, putting them in position to be just 1 2-point conversion away, not from tying the game, not from making the game look more respectable, but from winning the dang thing. Like, that's massive. We'll get to the 2-point conversion call later on, but I think that it was the right choice to go for 2 and give your team an opportunity to go out there and win. They said they would have done it up against the Los Angeles Rams. They had every reason to do it again here up against the Washington Commanders. The Saints scored 14 points in the first half, just 14 points on offense. Or excuse me, I'm sorry, not the Saints. The Saints only ran 14 plays on offense in the first half. My apologies. 14 plays run by the New Orleans Saints in the first half. The Washington Commanders scored 14 points in the first half. Not the way you want your game to look. Remember what we said going into this game, that the New Orleans Saints were very likely to rely on their run game and try to pull out the same kind of game plan that they had ready for the Los Angeles Rams earlier on in the season when they forced the Rams to run only 3 plays in the first quarter. That game script got completely flipped on the New Orleans Saints, who were not able to put together a drive better than 6 plays in the first half, right? So when you look at that, that ends up putting the New Orleans Saints in a really bad position. The Saints didn't total 20 minutes of time of possession in this game. That's where this game kind of went awry for the New Orleans Saints, was that they weren't able to put things together in the first half. Very similar to what they were probably trying to do to the Washington Commanders and what they succeeded doing in the first quarter, at least, up against the Los Angeles Rams. So that ended up telling you the story of the first half. The story of the second half was 4 straight scoring drives led by Spencer Rattler. If Derek Carr cannot start going up against Green Bay, here's what we know about Derek Carr. Derek Carr did not practice, and that includes, as I understand it, the walkthrough yesterday. So he did not. So that would mean that he likely didn't clear concussion protocol. Maybe we'll learn more about that this week. The Saints do get an extra day this week because they don't have a game until Monday night up against the Green Bay Packers. So with that being the case, there could be time that Derek Carr could be ready to go next weekend. If that does not end up being the case, Spencer Rattler should be the starting quarterback. It doesn't mean that they're going to win the game in Green Bay, right? That's going to be a tough environment to play. It's going to be a tough environment to play in winter conditions, Lambeau Field, against a team that's better than the Saints are. All that, just because Spencer Rattler could potentially start does not mean that the New Orleans Saints would win that game. But had Spencer Rattler started this one, they might have won this one. And I would say very confidently that they could have won this one. So I would say that if Derek Carr can't go next weekend, Spencer Rattler should again get the start up against the Green Bay Packers. Let me give you another fact. The New Orleans Saints had just 38 yards of total net offense in the first half. 38 yards of total net offense. That's kind of crazy when you consider the fact that Jake Haener perfectly placed a pass to Alvin Kamara on the Texas, that little angle route. They gained 29 yards on that pass alone, but only had 38 total net yards in the first half. Spencer Rattler comes in on the first drive, completes a pass to Marquez Valdes-Scantling for 39 yards. That one completion outgained the entirety of the New Orleans Saints total net offense in the first half. The Saints desperately needed a spark. They made the change. That's what Darren Rizzi said was the impetus, the reason, the catalyst behind the quarterback change, that they needed that spark. They absolutely got it as they turned to Spencer Rattler, who put this team nearly in position to walk away with a victory in a game where they were 7.5-point underdogs, the most points given against the New Orleans Saints since 1999. That's major for the New Orleans Saints. So this might have been a loss for New Orleans, and maybe you don't believe in moral victories, but I'll tell you, if there was ever a moral victory to believe in, it was this one. Because by all intents and purposes, the New Orleans Saints should have gotten run off the field today, and they did not. Partly because of the quarterback change, partly because of the defense playing a much better second half than first half. We're going to get to all that. Before we get to that, though, what I want to discuss is why the New Orleans Saints haven't and will not give up on Jake Haener despite this performance. Let's take a look at that next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. BetterHelp Therapy Online is integral for me, especially during the holidays, right? The holiday season sometimes can be a little bit challenging with the mentals and everything like that. But I'll tell you, my favorite things when it comes to holidays is the comfort of like a warm cup of hot cocoa, a warm cup of coffee is my typical go-to. So therapy is a great way to bring something to your life that's comforting all year round, not just around the holidays. But the holidays, of course, have been big for me when it comes to therapy time. Brings up a lot of stuff, family, all that kind of stuff, loss, everything. So it's something that I really struggle with around this time of year. So I'm really grateful for all of you for giving me somebody to lean on. But I'm also very grateful to BetterHelp for giving me my therapist to lean on and everything as well. So if you've been thinking about therapy, I highly recommend that you give BetterHelp a try. Find comfort this December with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon. You get 10% off of your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. It's that time of year. The college football playoff is back. And with the new 12-team expanded format, it's guaranteed to be bigger and better than ever, bringing you all of the hard-hitting and high-flying excitement that you love. TNT Sports coverage of the college football playoff begins December 21st, starting with the college football playoff kickoff show presented by AT&T at 11 a.m. Eastern time, leading into our first matchup, Southern Methodist University Mustangs battling it out with the Penn State Nittany Lions at noon. Then the Clemson Tigers will take on and look to upset the Texas Longhorns in a showdown at 4 p.m. Eastern time. Don't miss a moment of the action. Watch the college football playoff presented by Allstate live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and Max. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. The New Orleans Saints did not get the first half that they expected out of quarterback Jake Haener, so they ended up swapping him out, benching him in the second half, and rolling with rookie quarterback Spencer Rattler, who made this game really exciting. But make no mistake about it, the New Orleans Saints are going to be nowhere close to giving up on Jake Haener. They very much believe that they have a good young pair of quarterbacks in this on this team and on this roster. However, they might think differently of those two quarterbacks. They might look at one as a very talented potential backup, while they look at another as a very talented potential starter. And I think if you look at what the New Orleans Saints have done and the decisions that they've made over the course of this season, I think you can see that that's exactly the way that the New Orleans Saints look at their two young assets. That's not a slight against Jake Haener. I have been labeled a Haener hater. I know that. It's fine. It's okay. But it's just the truth of the NFL, which moves very quickly. Oftentimes, once you enter the league, you end up getting published, or not published, but you kind of end up getting like pigeonholed into one type of player. And that might be what's going to happen with Jake Haener, who can be and deserves to be a longtime player in this league. He just might have to do it as a backup quarterback. So make no mistake about it, the New Orleans Saints are not going to be ready to give up on Jake Haener just based on this one performance. And having a guy ready to be a long-term backup option is not the same as giving up on a player. I want to be very clear about that. So as we look at Jake Haener's day today, completed 4 passes on 10 attempts, was sacked 3 times, threw an interception. Not a great day for the young quarterback. If we look at it and compare it to what we've seen amongst the 23, Jake Haener was the 24th, but the 23 other 4th to 7th round picks or day 3 picks that have started games since the 2017 draft, of those teams that have, or of those players that have started games since 2017, his performance isn't really surprising, right? 5 of those 23 quarterbacks, now 5 of those 24 quarterbacks won those games. Only 2 of them won multiple starts, and one of those was Brock Purdy, who completely skews the stats. The other one was actually former Washington Commander Sam Howell, who won his first 3 games and then went on to be something like 2-13 after that. So being a day 3 pick, getting your first start, Spencer Rattler, of course, included in that number of players that lost their first start as day 3 picks since 2017, getting the start of games since 2017, being a day 3 pick, being a day 3 quarterback, and getting to start your first game since 2017 has not been the most successful pathway or most immediate pathway to success for a player. It takes time. And so the Saints are going to give both of these guys time. Do I put the entirety? You can't even put the entirety of all the things that went wrong in the first half on Jake Haener. The protection was awful in the first half. I mean, just turnstile type situation to where Jake Haener was under pressure. It felt like every single one of his 10 dropbacks or 10 attempts, every single one of his 13 or so dropbacks throughout that. Now, the protection got better going into the second half, but you could see that for this New Orleans Saints offensive line, still very much knocking the rust off. They struggled to protect the run last week in New York. They struggled to protect the passer this week here in Washington. And even in that second half with Spencer Rattler, the protection was better, but there was still a lot of pressure on Spencer Rattler as well. Spencer Rattler, though, got sacked twice, but had some calls go his way with some unnecessary roughness calls, some roughing the passer calls, erasing some of those sacks and putting the New Orleans Saints into some awesome field position or good field position in those situations. So the slow first half wasn't all on Jake Haener, right? There was the protection, There were penalties as well. Jake Haener went out there and completed a big pass to Marquez. I believe it was Marquez Valdez-Scantling early on in the game. That ends up getting wiped out because of a holding penalty. You saw some costly penalties that got them off the board. You saw a costly penalty on a missed field goal, on a field goal that ended up extending a drive that turned into an eventual touchdown drive. You saw another penalty that was called, another situation to where like the end of that quarter shouldn't have ticked over and all these other things. Like there was just some bad officiating. There were some costly penalties that were committed in this game as well. Peyton Turner was apparently called for a roughing the snapper or some kind of penalty against hitting the snapper because his leg brushed up against the center. I don't get that one, but if that was the explanation, that feels a little iffy to me at best. A couple of missed calls as well on some pass interference things. It was a whole thing, right? There's a lot of different examples of all that, but all in all, if you look at the individual performances of the quarterback, Spencer Rattler was the better quarterback today. And Spencer Rattler found more success with the same unit, minus Alvin Kamara, with the exception of the first drive of the second half, than Jake Haener did. So I think that's mostly going to be what dominates some of the narrative. And the other thing that's going to dominate the narrative is, should the New Orleans Saints have started Jake Haener over Spencer Rattler, or should they have started Spencer Rattler over Jake Haener? All told, I think if you start Spencer Rattler, you probably, if he plays the way he played in the second half, you probably have the better outlook in this game. But we don't really know for sure, because do some of the calls that went the Saints' way in the second half still go Spencer Rattler's way in the first half? There's a lot of those things right there to consider too. But the New Orleans Saints are not going to give up on Jake Haener. They're going to continue to treat both of these guys the way they've continued to treat both of these guys. But I would expect that if Derek Carr can't go for any of the remainder of the season, whether that is for the rest of the season or for another game, another 2 games, whatever it might be, that you probably see Spencer Rattler being the starter in this matchup or in those matchups. And I do think that it's a value for New Orleans at this point to continue to evaluate the young talent that they have on the roster. We'll get to some of the other talent here in a moment, like Kendre Miller, who had a really strong day. But I do think that continuing to get looks at Spencer Rattler could be good. If Spencer Rattler struggles, go ahead and get more looks at Jake Haener. If Jake Haener struggles, then you know what you have and what you don't have. You get to answer those questions going into what's going to be a big, eventful, busy, and consequential offseason for this New Orleans Saints team that's going to be looking for a new head coach, that's going to be potentially undergoing a change on its offensive system, that's going to see more staff changes, and because of that, might see more roster and personnel changes as well. So get a look at the players right now that you feel like you might be able to build your foundation around for the future years and for the upcoming year here in 2025. So don't expect the New Orleans Saints to mail it in when it comes to either one of these quarterbacks. They're going to continue to show belief in both of them. But I do think that you're going to start to see one of them, the signs of one of them being treated a little bit more like a potential starter than the other. And I think right now that conversation will go in favor of Spencer Rattler based upon what you saw in this game. The composure and the 2-minute drive at the end of the game was outstanding. You saw the run game be able to come in that situation as well, but good delivery on the football, clutch, getting everybody up to the line, spiking the football. There's some conversation about whether or not the clock delayed and didn't start at 9 seconds and all this other stuff. I think if you watch the tape, you'll see that. But nonetheless, get up to the line of scrimmage, spike the football. Who cares if the clock's running or not? That's not your job as the quarterback. Your job as the quarterback is to get your offense up to the line, get everybody set, snap, and spike. And that's exactly what Spencer Rattler did, showing you something that the Chicago Bears would be jealous of. All right, coming up next, let's take a look at the decision to go for it for 2. I'm going to tell you why I think it was the absolute right decision by Darren Rizzi and the New Orleans Saints. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by friends over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, who had the New Orleans Saints as 7.5-point underdogs here up against the Washington Commanders. That's the most points laid against the New Orleans Saints since they were 8.5-point underdogs in 1999. And the New Orleans Saints said, I'm covering, right? They come in with a 1-point loss in this game, unfortunately unable to get the win. But if you took the New Orleans Saints against the spread, you walked away a happy customer this weekend, especially if you're a new customer. Because if you put $5 down and won that $5 bet, you got $150 in bonus bets just for winning that $5 bet. You can do that now over with the FanDuel Sportsbook app, where you can also check out live stats, live bets, play-by-play, and more, all in the same window where you place those bets. Just head over to FanDuel.com to join today. As a new customer, you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets by winning your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. The New Orleans Saints don't get a win. And the reason why they don't get a win is because they were unable to come up with a 2-point conversion at the end of the game to eclipse the Washington Commanders in what would have been a 21-20 win. It turns into a 20-19 loss. So now the question is, was going for 2 at the end of the game the right decision? And the answer, from me at least, is absolutely yes. You could discuss the play call a little bit. Maybe you wanted to run it. But look, I think that there's something about the fact that they put the ball in the hands of Spencer Rattler, the young rookie quarterback, to go out there and get them that 2 points. That is a good sign from this New Orleans Saints team. A little bit more trust, all those other things. Interim head coach Darren Rizzi made one promise. Well, made a couple promises, but made one of the promises that he did make when he took over was that this team was not going to be boring to watch. That was not boring to watch. The New Orleans Saints lost this game, but it might be one of the most exciting and fun games that I've ever gotten to cover live. I truly mean that. Easily one of the most exciting and fun games that I've ever gotten to cover. And I get it. Like for Saints fans that are watching this game, it sucks because it was a loss, right? Like there's no doubt about that. People tend to not want to like buy into the moral victory thing and stuff. I completely understand that. No grudge with that at all. I have no gripe with that at all. I get it. Like you want your team to win. I understand that. Nothing wrong with that at all. If I'm just presenting like another viewpoint of somebody that's covering the team and trying to come at it from an objective standpoint, I'm from New Orleans. You know what it is. But like if I'm trying to cover it from an objective standpoint, the thing that I would say here is, and as I do cover it from an objective standpoint, the thing that I will say here is that the Saints learned what they needed to learn in this game. And they got good news, even despite the loss. And I think if you're going to run a 2-point conversion and put it in the hands of Spencer Rattler, have him do what it is that he's best at. Throw on the run, get him on the move, let him use his legs, let that threaten that Carolina. Let the legs threaten that Commanders, Washington, defense a little bit. And then he goes for a big target in Jawan Johnson, actually delivers a pretty good pass, maybe a little high, but still a good delivery on that pass. Go for the big target that's close to the line of scrimmage, right where you just got the touchdown, which is at the sort of front corner of the end zone right over here to my left. Go for it. That's great. I love the call to go for it. I'm fine with the play call. I don't think the play call was a big issue at all. And here's why I think, beyond all that, here's why I think going for it 4-2 at the end of the game for the win was the right decision. This is a game, the game of football, that is based entirely on competition, belief, and a little bit of ego, right? I'll tell you that every offseason, because there's always that narrative in the offseason like, oh, why would any quarterback want to sign in New Orleans? Why would any offensive coordinator want to be on the New Orleans Saints coaching staff? Now the narrative is, why would any head coach take this New Orleans Saints job? Because of their egos. Because of their egos. I've told you this before. Every coach, every player, every coordinator, every play caller, every scout, every media member, no, not really the media members, but everybody feels like they can be the difference to make a team better. And when you show something like what the Saints just showed, which is a belief in self, in a game where they had, according to the odds makers, according to the experts, according to all of it, had no business believing in themselves, they showed a belief in self. And that's why I think that 2-point conversion call was the right decision, because it was more than just the 2 points. It was more than just the final score on the scoreboard. This was about showing that you believe in yourself. And I love that call from Darren Rizzi, the offensive coaching staff, the players, the defense, literally nobody on the sideline in the locker room that I asked believed that the Saints should not have gone for 2 in that situation. Yes, you can kick the extra point, You can go to overtime. You can give yourself a longer opportunity to win or lose. Absolutely. But I think that the right decision in this game was going for 2, even though they didn't get it. That's my personal opinion, though. I understand if people feel differently than that. But I got to tell you, the one thing that you risk if you don't go for 2 in that situation is that you're showing a lack of belief in those players. And in the same breath of showing a lack of belief in those players, you're saying, but I bet you can go win it in overtime. Come on now. Come on now. Especially when you've publicly talked about potentially going for it, going for 2 to win the game against the Los Angeles Rams, and then now all of a sudden you're not going to do that against the Commanders? Yeah, you're definitely doing that against the Commanders, especially when your quarterback was looking good, your offense was looking good, you were moving the football, everything was kind of going your way, and momentum was on your side. The ovation when Foster Moreau caught the 1-yard touchdown from Spencer Rattler to get to 19 points was outstanding, right? The Superdome was like a little bit emptier than you're mostly used to seeing it, and it emptied out even more after halftime. But I'll tell you, the Dome, with less people in it at the end of the game, was louder than it ever proved to be at the beginning of this game. And that was a massive moment of momentum. I love the Saints trying to capitalize on that. I'm all about it. I think it was the right call. All right, let's take a look at a couple of other, and please feel free to let me know what you think too, because I'm happy to be wrong. I'm happy to be wrong. I always am. I don't care about, like, I'm never a credit guy. Like, I never come on here and be like, oh, I told you so. That's not really my thing. But I do truly believe that was a necessary call by Darren Rizzi. I don't think it impacts his job or his opportunity to get the head coaching job or anything like that. If nothing else, it just shows that he's got a belief in his guys and that he put those guys in a position to go out there and believe in themselves. And I think there's value in that when it comes to coaching. All right. All that aside, young players, right? We talked about Spencer Rattler having a good day and everything. I think you learned some good stuff about Kendre Miller as well. Alvin Kamara scores a touchdown on how about Cedric Wilson Jr. with a 21-yard touchdown strike on the double pass? How cool was that? Perfectly called, coming right off of the momentum of the 39-yard completion from Rattler to Marquez Valdez-Scantling. Awesome. Absolutely love that. So Cedric Wilson hits that touchdown, but in the process, on a beautiful catch, one-handed over the shoulder, stretch out catch, got 2 feet in by running back Alvin Kamara. Sounds like he tweaked his groin a little bit, played a little bit more, but then, or maybe was checked out, whatever it might be, but was effectively ruled questionable and did not return to the game because of that groin injury. So now the Saints in the second half got a little bit heavier in terms of their usage of Kendre Miller, who averaged 5.1 yards per carry and is averaging over 4.5 yards per carry already this season. I think you're learning more and more that Kendre Miller, when he's on the field, is going to be a guy that you're going to be able to rely on to keep your run game going. He was integral to that final drive and the way that he was able to run the ball, running for 10-plus yards on a couple of different occasions, had a 17-yard breakout run in the second half, all that. He was integral to the Saints' success in the second half in terms of being able to move the ball on the ground, create a little bit of that opportunity. You'd like to see the Saints maybe take a little bit more advantage of play action in those situations, but they didn't really get there in this game, surprisingly enough. But Kendre was outstanding for this team in the second half in this one, in particular in that 2-minute drive at the end of the game. And a brilliantly called 2-minute drive, by the way, by Clint Kubiak. Did not get away from the run game, continued to mix and match things. That's what you need to do in order to create a really solid 2-minute drive. So that's another young guy that I just wanted to shout out in this matchup is running back Kendre Miller, because there's been so much of the narrative around him that has been kind of unfavorable. So it was great to kind of see him be able to come out here and continue for a second week in a row to make his case for why he should be a guy that Saints fans trust moving forward. 8 sacks by the New Orleans Saints defense. I spent all week talking about how the Saints probably weren't going to have a lot of sacks in this game because they were going to kind of mush rush and all this other stuff. Shut up, Ross, you dumb idiot. They got 8 sacks in this game, first time since for a long time that they've had that many sacks. So really excellent stuff there. Cam Jordan got his first multi-sack game since Week 16 of the 2022 season up against the Gardner Minshew-led Philadelphia Eagles. Chase Young against his former team, 2 sacks. How about that for another young guy that's continued to really stand out over the course of the past couple of weeks? Had 10 pressures according to Next Gen Stats last week. Everybody said, yeah, but he's got to turn those into sacks. Well, he put 2 of them down in this one against his former team, so that's pretty outstanding. Defense only let up 6 points in the second half after giving up 2 passing touchdowns early on in this game, too. A couple of shots between Jaden Daniels and Terry McLaurin that Jaden Daniels uncharacteristically missed, but hey, you'll still take that. And right now, Kool-Aid McKinstry was injured. Darren Rizzi was told that had the defense gone back out on the end of the game or had they gone to overtime, he would have been able to play. So sounds like good news there. Marquez Valdez-Scantling took a scary hit, but was able to get back in to this game. So the only injury of concern right now is still a big one, and it's the groin injury when it comes to Alvin Kamara. All right, y'all, we appreciate you very much, as always, for being here with us and for joining us, whether you're catching us live or catching us later here for another post-game episode of Locked On Saints. I have a fresh episode for you in the morning as well to get you all caught up with some of the intricacies of this game. Tuesday, we'll dive into Darren Rizzi's presser. Wednesday, Thursday, will be the usual sort of cadence as we get ready for a Monday night game and a stress-free weekend without any New Orleans Saints football. So we appreciate you very much, as always, for being here and making us your first listen. Thank you for all the support. Make sure you go and check out Locked On NFL to hear about another exciting week of NFL action with Tyler Rowland and Tony Wiggins. And we'll see you here next time on Locked On Saints. We appreciate you very much for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. If you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how your mom and them. And trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you.